Hi Storytime lovers! The summer holidays are fast approaching for many of you, so I thought I'd take you on a trip to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, to Canada, thanks to a book written by a Canadian author and illustrated by a Canadian artist about the inspiring real-life story of a teacher called Alary who grows the most extraordinary vegetables. But what grows in Alary's garden is much more than vegetables. It's a lesson about kindness, caring, and cooperation. This book was written by Alary, a Canadian writer and religious educator. Her books are meant to teach and entertain, but most of all to encourage children to wonder about the world and to ask really big questions. Just like the little girl in Mirror and the Big Story, which is the story of little Mirror who knows two different stories about the way the world came to be. But which story is right? In this book, Mirror goes on a journey where she discovers a story big enough to include everyone, and she learns to respect and revere the traditions of others. Have you noticed the beautiful warm tones on the cover of What Grew in Alary's Garden? Well, they're thanks to Kass, Reich, a Canadian artist and educator who has travelled around the world from London to Beijing, Hong Kong and Melbourne. She also provided some beautiful illustrations for Carson Crosses Canada, a sweet and fun adventure of 70-year-old Annie McGruder and her dog who set out on a road trip across Canada to visit her sister. And she also illustrated Dr. Coo and the Pigeon Protest, the story of a big city pigeon who is tired of the way people treat him and the other pigeons. So the pigeons become activists and decide to form a protest. What Grew in Alary's Garden was published by Kids Can Press, a Canadian-owned publisher of children's books, which includes characters such as Franklin the Turtle, which has sold over 65 million books in over 30 languages around the world. And now, let's find out just what grew in Alary's garden. In a sprawling city, in a leafy neighborhood, on a narrow street, in a cozy house with a tiny yard, lived a girl named Grace. Next door, in a yard just as tiny, Grace's neighbor Alary had a garden. In his garden, Alary grew all sorts of vegetables, but not ordinary ones. There were buttery yellow carrots and purple potatoes, rainbow chard and scarlet runner beans, rosy tomatoes the color of ripe peaches, and black ones with red insides. "You won't find these in most grocery stores," declared Alary, admiring a zebra-striped tomato. Grace thought Alary's garden was one of the wonders of the world. Every spare moment she had, Grace helped Alary in his garden. Together, they watered and weeded, planted and pruned, hoed and harvested. And when bugs burrowed into the carrots and slugs and snails chewed the lettuce, Grace and Alary solved the problem together. "We can figure this out," said Alary. At the library, Grace learned that lots of bugs don't like the smell of marigolds. Grace and Alary planted marigolds among the carrots, and the bugs disappeared. As for the slugs and snails, they picked them off with their bare fingers. "Our hard work will be worth it," said Alary, popping a slug into a bucket. "This is important. We're not just growing vegetables." "What are we growing?" asked Grace. "Wait and see," said Alary. Keeping squirrels away from the tomatoes was a bigger problem. "We can figure this out," said Alary, scratching his head. They built little cages out of wire. The tomato plants could grow inside the wire, but the squirrels could not get at the fruit. "Sometimes fences are handy," said Alary. When summer ended and autumn came, Grace helped Larry gather and dry seeds to save for next spring. Later that winter, they started growing the tomato seeds in little cups. There were hundreds of them. Larry, a teacher, took the tomato seedlings to school so his students could look after them. "What will they do with these plants?" Grace wanted to know. "That's the best part," replied Larry. "These are not just tomato plants." "What are they?" asked Grace. "Wait and see," said Larry. Winter melted away and spring sprouted. One warm afternoon, Grace found Larry on his porch with a pile of papers in his lap. "You wanted to know what my students would do with our plants," he said. "Listen to these letters. Dear friend, I'm the kid who used to steal pears from your trees. I am giving you this tomato plant to say sorry. Sincerely, Matthew. Dear Mrs. Bianchi, I live next door to you, but we hardly ever talk. You have the most amazing flower garden. It makes me happy just to see it. I am giving you this tomato plant to tell you that you make the world more beautiful for a lot of people. Best wishes, Amrit. Dear bus driver, I rode on your school bus for years. You were always so friendly to all the kids. I am giving you this tomato plant to say thank you. From Adira. My students will give the plants away, and they wrote these letters to tell why, explained Larry. Every plant is a gift, a little green tendril reaching out to someone, connecting people. Now I see, cried Grace. We were growing a whole lot more than tomatoes. Exactly, said Larry. But a shadow fell. One afternoon, Grace went outside and found Larry sitting among his tomatoes. The plants looked wilted. So did Larry. And then Grace saw why. The neighbor on the other side had added a big panel to the top of his fence, blocking out the sun on Larry's garden. So much for my tomatoes, Larry said sadly. Larry went next door to speak to his neighbor, but they could not agree. He says the fence makes him feel safe, said Larry with a sigh. I guess that makes sense, said Grace slowly, thinking about the handy fence that protected the tomato plants from hungry squirrels. But I have another idea. What's that? wondered Larry. Wait and see, replied Grace. The next morning, when Larry's neighbor stepped outside to get the newspaper, there on the porch was a small pot, a packet of seeds, and a note. Dear neighbor, I live 2 doors down from you. I like to help Larry in his garden. I am giving you these seeds to say I hope we can all be friends. I think having good friends is the best way to feel safe. Sincerely, Grace. P.S. I have a plan. Could you meet me outside on Saturday morning? That weekend, Larry heard hammering. When he went outside, he found Grace in the yard next door, working side by side with his neighbor. The high panel on the fence was gone. So was the shadow. Now they were pounding nails into the fence and tying strings to make a kind of ladder. Larry, cried Grace, come and see. Larry peered over the fence and saw seed packets. We're planting beans, explained Grace, and they're going to climb the fence. Larry's neighbor looked up from the string he was knotting. "I figured we could put the fence to better use," he said. That afternoon, Larry and Grace and their neighbor sat down together and feasted on fresh lemonade and cherry tomatoes from Larry's garden, and they were still warm from the sun. Well, what an incredible life lesson Larry and Grace have given us by showing us to focus on the solution, not the problem, and also to communicate. By the way, do you remember all the different solutions Larry and Grace find to overcome the difficulties they come across? Let's have a little quiz. How do they deal with the bugs in the carrots? By planting marigolds, because bugs don't like the smell of marigolds. What about getting rid of the slugs and the snails? They pick them with their bare fingers. And how do they manage to keep the squirrels away from the tomatoes? By building little cages of wire to put over the tomatoes. And most importantly, their biggest challenge, how do they solve the conflict with Larry's neighbor? Well, first Larry tries to speak to him, but he doesn't manage to convince him. Grace is the one to find a solution. She figures out a way for the neighbor to keep his fence by growing beans on it without blocking out the sun on Larry's garden. And let's finish with a bonus question. What is Larry and Grace's motto? That is to say, a phrase they use as a guiding principle throughout the story. It starts with "we can." Do you remember now? We can figure this out. What about you? How do you overcome obstacles? I would love to hear about a way you figured out how to solve a problem. You can post it in the comments section below. I really hope you enjoyed this story and that it will help you next time you have to figure out something. Thank you for listening. Take care, read on, and see you soon.